Coaches, welcome to Coach Gibbs Defense Lab. I'm juiced and honored to have the defensive backs coach for the Toronto Argonauts, Jovon Johnson, with us. Coach, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, man. I'm happy to be on here.
This is awesome. So, Coach and I connected on social media a few years back, and I'm great. Obviously he's got some some things going on, with the Argonauts. So I'm glad he had some time. So, Coach, we talked about off camera. You had training camp with the Jets, 2 years with the Steelers, 12 in the CFL, 6 with the Blue Bombers, 3 with the Rough Riders, 2 with the Red Blacks, and 1 with the Alouettes, man. So go ahead. I'd like you to kind of open up with talking about the differences for you between the NFL and the CFL, and if there's anything else you want to highlight as far as like coaches that you had that really stuck out for you, or games or anything like that. So I'm gonna let you have the floor.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, man, when it comes to the difference that I see between the CFL and the NFL, it's definitely not a lack of talent or ability. And a lot of guys will tell you there's guys in the CFL who are Americans. They just, for whatever reason, didn't get the opportunity that the guys that got it in the NFL got. But from a skill standpoint, I think the CFL game is a lot more strenuous on your ability. It strains you a lot more than the NFL. The NFL is more detailed and how they do things, right? It's like you got to be in a certain spot, ball got to be on time. Those are the things that that the NFL is different from the CFL in that aspect. I think the CFL is more like a basketball game on a football field, right? It's like, getting the ball out in space and letting guys run and things like that. And it looks like chaos on the football field, but when you break it down to the nuts and bolts of it, you start to see a very clear picture of what's going on. And a lot of American guys that transition from the NFL to the CFL, they struggle early because, one, they come in with the mindset that they're better than and bigger than the game, but two, the adjustment to the rules, the style of play and those things take a toll on you as well. So American guys coming north, it takes a little bit of time to just kind of get used to the style of play. The CFL is a 3-down league versus the 4-down league in the NFL. The field is bigger. So in the NFL, you're going to have a 53 and a third wide field, whereas the CFL is 65 yards wide, right? So now you got more space. You get a lot more returner type of receivers that can make guys miss in space, makes it a little bit more difficult. And then also, there's an extra 10 yards in the middle of the field. So you got a 110-yard field versus a 100-yard field, right? The red zone, obviously the end zones in the NFL are 10 yards and CFL is 20. So if you have a ball on the 1-yard line, you could still run everything under the sun if you wanted to, but most teams in a CFL will go quarterback sneak from 1, but they could still throw the back of the end zone fade, and it's a regular fade route versus the jump ball type of fade in the NFL. And then also the motion in the CFL, you can motion with all the guys on the field, right? So all the guys except for the O-lineman can move. Right, they can move in motion, they can run at the line of scrimmage, but just like down south, there has to be 7 guys on the line of scrimmage, right? So now you got your X and Z receivers, they can move laterally, they can't motion towards the line of scrimmage, right? So that's one of the biggest differences. In the NFL, you can only move one guy unless you're shifting and trading, and then you can motion one person. Like it kind of makes it a little bit different, right? And then when you think about coverage, it's a lot more adjusting on the fly in the CFL, right? You got to be able to communicate, in and out calls, who's tracking who, and things of that nature. Whereas the NFL, when you got a stack, it's pretty much a stationary stack. So it's a lot easier to defend versus guys running in motion. But from a gameplay standpoint, I think it's very similar in talent. Just a lot of guys in the CFL didn't get the opportunities that some NFL guys did get.
So, I think that's a great, thorough explanation. What are some of the things that for you playing and having the opportunity to playing the NFL and then also playing the CFL, like what sticks out for you? Like, is there a coach in the NFL that you kind of model yourself after? CFL, is there a moment where you were like, wow, like you looked up and you saw a crowd and you're like, holy cow, like I'm here. Like what was like your welcome, I guess, what was your welcome to the NFL and CFL moment?
My well, from a coaching standpoint, the person that I got my identity from is Phil Parker at the University of Iowa. He took me from a young man with tons of potential and athletic ability, but I caution people from using the word potential, right? Because potential is something that is attainable only if you put the work in, right? You can have all the potential in the world and never ever amount to it or reach it. And I think my college coach really maximized, my ability, and he challenged me every day when it came to my technique. From an athletic ability standpoint, I could do everything under the sun, but my technique was flawed. And I would make plays in college and he would curse me out, and it'd be like, well, if you do this in a game, then that play is going to look different. And it was that challenge every day that really kind of stuck with me, and it challenged me to rely more on my technique than my athletic ability. And I think that's kind of where I began to learn, the ins and outs of the game, started to be a student of the game, prepare more, and just start to study offenses and how they work and how they evolve and things of that nature. So Phil Parker is the one I get my identity from and my style. But in the NFL, there's two guys that I really admire, which is Dick LeBeau with the Pittsburgh Steelers and his philosophies of sim pressures. Every guy of the 11 guys on the field can blitz at some point in time, and just being off schedule, and being unpredictable where teams can't just game plan, okay, you're going to sim pressure from this side, or, you're going to do this or do that. So Dick LeBeau is really a person that I admire from a coaching standpoint, from his philosophy and just the way he goes about business and his way that he teaches things. But also Darren Perry, the DB coach that I had with the Pittsburgh Steelers, because I think, he also would stand on the table for me, right? Like he believed in me as a player. He helped me get some reps in game because of the work that I put in practice. And being a practice squad guy and having a coach that trusts you and believe in you and just wants to try to see you succeed, was more than I could ever imagine and ask for. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned in Pittsburgh. After my second year, Cowher ended up retiring and Tomlin came in. So it was just a change of the guard at the head coaching position. So that kind of took a toll on my NFL career. I think if Cowher had stayed, I probably would have played more or had a little bit longer stint in the NFL than I did. And then everything works and happens for a reason, right? I go to Canada. I struggled early, not because of my talent and ability, but because of my mentality, right? I think I ruffled feathers with the guys who had already been up there. And I challenged those guys every day to be on the top of their game, because I would reiterate to them that I wasn't there to be their friend. And some guys didn't take that really well, right? Like, I didn't come to Canada to be your friend. I came to Canada to take your job. And that was kind of my mentality, right? I think I went about it the wrong way as a guy coming in, just because of, where I had come from and what my goals were. I didn't align with some of the guys just because of that, right? I was hungry. I wanted to play. I didn't want to be on the practice squad. Like, that wasn't where I was at mentally. I was mentally, trying to take somebody's job. And when I did get the opportunity to play, I showcased what I was able to do. And the guy whose spot I ended up playing in for, he came right back off of injury as soon as he saw me play. He was like, "Oh no," right? So that's kind of just how it works. And then I ended up going over to Winnipeg, and I had a hell of a career in Winnipeg. Did some things that far exceeded my expectations. I had some really good teammates, guys that I trusted with my eyes closed. And we just came to work every day with a relentless pursuit of excellence and effort. And it kind of worked out. And that led me to prolonging my career a lot longer up there. Had the opportunity to go to Ottawa and play. And then every team that I played for, minus the 1 year in Montreal, we went to the Grey Cup. So had a pretty good run.
Yeah, that's and you and I were talking before we came on about the Argonauts, and I was equate that to the Rocket Ishmael, and
Yeah.
Doug Flutie and John Candy is one of the owners. Dating myself here a little bit, but so Coach, that's all great stuff. I think that's a lot of things that not just coaches but players that listen to this can take to heart. Obviously wanting to pursue their dreams and needing to understand the opportunity that you're presented. One place may not work out, but you had a hell of a run and playing for multiple championships. And, that at the end of the day, you'll look back at that, and that's a great thing. Let's talk about, I guess take us through like a practice, like with your guys, like talk about like the everyday drills you do. I know, like we talked about the difference, with the field and, the yardage and the measurements, like drills, coverage things. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about pressures you guys run. Just go ahead and walk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like the way I kind of build out our everyday focus drills, I call them EDFs. Some people call them EDDs, but our everyday focus drills are going to be the things that we do as defensive backs on the regular, right? So I'm going to make sure that I set time aside to get our pedal progression stuff in, right? So we're going to work pre-practice. I like to get my guys out. I tell them we're gonna get our gears oiled up so we can have a great day of practice. So we go out early. We'll do our pedal progression stuff before practice. So we'll get into our walkout, which I call walking that out, key in the 3-step. So we'll walk out, get into a tempo pedal, turn and burst to a crossover run. We'll do it from the hash to the sideline, or from the sideline to the hash, and then back from the hash to the sideline. So we'll go both ways, so that way they get to open both ways, so it's not just one dimensional. And then we'll get into a tight weave progression, right, of just staying tight to the line and gaining ground rather than going over and back the line. So we want to make sure that we are gradually weaving and not being an irky-jerky guy going over and back the line 1,000 times, right? Because when the receiver's running at you, he's not going to run at you and just go side to side, left and right 1,000 times. He's going to gradually weave to try to maintain and capture your leverage. So we'll work a gradual pedal tight weave, and then we'll go to a pedal for weave for 5, right? So we're going to pedal and then push weave for 5 yards, both to the right and to the left, just as a hard stem, right? So you can get comfortable with, a receiver inside or outside releasing you on a hard stem, so you can push pedal either way. So we'll do that. Then we'll get into the world of turning and being under control. So we'll do a 2-burst drill where we will pedal, work to a crossover run, and then get back into a pedal, which is unorthodox because it doesn't happen that way in a game, but it's just is forcing you to have the body control to go from a crossover run back to a transition into a pedal. And then we'll open the crossover run opposite. So we'll do that. And then we'll get into what I call the fishtail drill, which is more for the safeties rather than the corners, but it's just a pedal and then turn and run 45, right? So we're going to work a 5-yard increment from a pedal. We'll crossover run at a 45-degree angle, like you're playing a post if you're a corner, but mostly for the safeties rotating to the middle of the field, right? And we'll work some techniques off of that in our indie period, where we'll work the cheat technique where you're working to your crossover to go to the middle of the field, but you're also key and run pass. That's kind of the progression. But we'll do that. Then we'll get into our W progression. So from that stuff in our pedal progression, now we're going to work on our short area quickness. So we're going to get into our pedal progression, right? We'll start with a tight, quick W, just to get our feet hot and getting our feet underneath our cylinder. I tell my guys all the time, like, we got to keep our feet in our Madden circle, right? All those guys play Madden, so I use things that they can relate to, so they understand like what I'm talking about, and they get it, right? So when I say in a Madden circle, feet underneath our armpits, right, staying inside our frame, we want to make sure our feet are tight and we're not wasting movements. So we'll do a quick one, right? We'll do a quick 1-2 W, and then we'll do it out, and then we'll come back, and then we'll get into our 5-yard W, right? So now we're going to work on a angle pedal and then drive for 45. I give them 2 breaks in the football. That way, one, we can work on our hands and our timing, but also I want to see those guys burst out the break on when they're coming to get the ball, right? Just training them to be instinctive and, driving on the football without hesitation or fear of running into a receiver, right? We have the right to the football just like they do. So we're going to go through the man. If he's in the way, he's got to go through. We got to go through him to get to the ball. So we'll do a W, then we'll do an M drill where we'll go a straight back pedal and drive for 45. Then I'll let those guys typically kind of shake their legs out a little bit, and then we'll go crossover run W drill, where we'll go face side, and then we'll go against the hip, right? And then after that, I have them watered down, and then we'll be ready to go. We should be fairly warmed up, even though doing those pedal progression drills is fairly tempoed down. Those guys should be, kind of got their heart rate going, their blood should be flowing, and their hips and ankles and knees should be a lot looser. So now then they get in the stretch. Once we get to Indy, then we're going to be focused on what's our install for today, right? We're going to get into our ABCs, the agilities, our block destruction and contact stuff, right? So we'll have some sort of block destruction drill every day. In my block destruction stuff, typically in training camp, I want to teach them how to get off a block rather than being the most physical guy on the field, right? I don't need you to be He-Man when I'm trying to teach you how to get off a block, right? We want to be proper hand placement, eyes in the right place. I'm a firm believer that your eyes are where your power lies, right? So if your eyes are on the blocker, right, you could defeat the blocker, right? But if you're looking for the football and you're not paying attention to the guy blocking you, he's going to block the shit out of you, right? It's just the way it goes. So we want to make sure that we're using our hands and putting our eyes on our indicator so that we can defeat the block first. We got to do one thing before another. So we're going to be tempo down, just working on hand placement, right? We're going to go, post arm over, right? So we're going to really work posting to our leverage, knocking down the wrist and going tight arm over, right, to get to our leverage shoulder of where we're supposed to fit at. And then we'll go post with a backdoor shed, right? So now we're going the ball carrier, he saw color with us being in our gap, and then he cut back. So now we still got to be able to play a 2 gap. So we're not going to just be 1 gap players. We're going to play both. So we're going to be effective. So then we'll get into choke and squeeze. So basically what I consider a choke and squeeze is, right, we're going to take our inside hand to the V of the neck. We're going to choke the shit out of this receiver, and we're going to squeeze them back down the line of scrimmage and keep our outside arm free, right? So we're thinking of being violent, having a vertical and horizontal leverage, and making sure that our body's in the right position, right? We'll do some things like that. And then, like, as we kind of progress in training camp, then we'll start to get on the move, work that stuff, as we kind of, gain some traction. But I'm always going to have some sort of block destruction, and I'm also going to have some sort of tackling drill in my Indy period, right? Because you can't expect a guy to go out and be efficient in tackling if you never practice it, right? Sometimes as coaches, you tend to forget that that's a major part of the game, and you get on guys and you yell at them, but in hindsight 50-50, if you didn't work on it, then you got to kind of take the blame and look in the mirror, because angles of tackling and the approach of tackling is why a lot of guys miss tackles, right? We want guys to be chest to chest when they tackle, but sometimes a guy might overrun it because they never get to a shimmy, right? Don't get to a short stride. So we just work on those things in our indie period so that we can have reps, right? We want to get to those 10,000 hours of reps of mastery where we can do it with our eyes closed. And it's not like we're asking guys to do things out of the ordinary, right? And then we'll think about what's our install for today. Are we installing 4, 3, 2, 1, whatever the case may be? And then we'll have a half line drill where we're working together and forcing guys to communicate. Like now we got to talk about it, right? What routes am I seeing? What's coming? What's going? And communicating what we're getting. That way we can all be on the same page. You can never get enough reps of communicating, right? Even in walkthrough, I challenge my guys to communicate, right? Like talk about the call, communicate it, what's our assignments? Let's talk about that so that everybody's on the same page and nobody's getting left behind, no stone unturned. So we kind of do that. And that's kind of the extent of our EDD stuff. It's all about a movement pattern as a defensive back. What are you installing? Getting your block destruction and tackling stuff in, and then just having that stuff outlined, right? How you coach it is how it'll show up on film, right? When I talk to my guys about, what we're doing, anything that we do, I want to see it show up on film, and I want it to look effortless. Like you're not thinking about it, you're doing it without thinking, right? So I try to keep those guys in tune with that stuff. But, from a coverage standpoint, I'm a match quarters guy. Like that's the world that I grew up in. At Iowa, we tag call a lot of different things in the quarters world. 25, 28 years later, the coaches are still there at Iowa and are still running match quarters, right? It's not changing, right? They care more about their guys understanding what they're doing, having a system of belief of what they're doing, and focusing more on the fundamentals of execution rather than the scheme of things, right? You can have all the schemes in the world and they may not work if your guys aren't fundamentally and technically sound, right? So we're going to focus on, our effort and pursuit, our tackling, and then we're going to make sure that we don't give up the explosive plays, right? If you can limit explosives, be very good and efficient at tackling, and play with relentless effort, you'll be really good on defense, right? It's not rocket science. But there are some things that are important to have, right? You got to have what I call the baseball pitcher count, right? You got to have your go-to pitch, you got to have your change-up pitch, and then you got to have a pitch that is off schedule, right? Those are the three things that you must have on defense to make sure that you're able to attack the offense in different ways, where you're not a sitting duck and you're always stagnant. Because offensive football is evolving. So just like they evolve, we want to make sure we evolve, right? They're in the spread triple option world, right? You're gonna get jet sweeps. You're going to get quarterback run game off a jet sweep. You're going to get, RPOs and throw the ball to the perimeter, try to outnumber a guy. How can they gain a +1, right? For us on defense, right, we want to do the same exact thing, right? How can we manipulate the offensive line and force the quarterback into making bad reads, right? How do you do that, right? You got to practice that stuff, and you got to be really detailed and have a system of belief that works, so that all 11 guys or 12 guys in the CFL, right, are on the same page and they know what's expected. And then, you start tag calling things out of what you want to play, split field cover stuff, right, based on the surface area that you're getting. So you can play quarters, you can play palms, you can play cover two based on the surface area. So we let the players kind of make the call on what they feel the most comfortable with based on, the alignments of the receivers, and then kind of play from there, right? So the picture changes for the quarterback, just by the safeties making a different call, right? It doesn't have to be the same call every time. So we can change the picture on the quarterback so he's not seeing the same thing over and over, right? Our underneath guys and match quarters got to be really good at matching underneath, making sure that they're not, we don't spot drop, right? We want to make sure that we create a vacuum between the underneath level and the over top level of guys, right? We create a vacuum where those windows are very tight underneath. We don't want the windows to be, big voids in our defense. We want to eliminate that in what we do. So we want to make sure that, the guys underneath are match carrying and delivering the routes that they're seeing to the next zone and not leaving a big void for quarterbacks to throw into. So that's kind of the match quarters world that I've grown up in and I lived in throughout my career. Something that I have a lot of trust and faith in that it works because I've seen it and I've been in it and I've coached it, I've called it, and it's been very successful over the years. And then we're going to play some of that here. And we're going to get into some man-to-man stuff. We're going to play some sim pressures. We're going to just keep you off guard. We're going to dictate the tempo of what we're seeing and getting from the offense.
Coach, I wrote down a whole bunch of stuff just for me. I'm being a little selfish here now. That was great. So I guess you went through the cover stuff. Just real quick, the season. So your guys' season is from when to when?
So we're from May. So we start training camp the first week of May, and then the Grey Cup is the 15th of November. 15th so you make it to the championship. Typically the season will end the end of October, and then the playoffs will start that first weekend in November, second weekend in November, and then the third weekend in November is the Grey Cup.
Okay. Just to go back to the coverage stuff you were talking about. So you would say that you guys primarily are in that match quarters world most of the time?
Yeah, we're going to be match quarters, make sure that we are very detailed and organized and, our guys are in the right spots and we're matching things. Because I just don't think the field is so big in the CFL that if you spot drop, you're just going to be leaving voids all over the place. Yeah.
No, there's no doubt. I guess my last question has to do with really, because obviously, we hooked up when you were coaching in college. I guess my question is, what's some advice for you? Somebody that played at the it was Power 5 and you were there Power 4 now, at the Power 4 level, and then been through the journey you're on. Like, what's some advice you would give like a 7th or 8th grader, right? That's aspiring to get to the next level, or I would say even more so like the parents in the youth, right? Like the parents that it's D1 or bust, even though, like, again, like you said, you don't like to use the word potential. You had God-given talent and your DC, brought everything out of you and taught you how to do things the right way. So what would be your advice to that parent and that kid that, like, hey, it's got to be all or nothing, especially in the landscape we are today with college football?
Yeah, I think my message to them would be, one, especially at that age, focus more on just being a kid and doing the most that you can do in all different sports, right? I think, when you get tied to one thing, right, there's a ton of football players that had extremely high success rates that played multiple sports at a young age, right? Because I think a lot of different sports gives you different skill sets to be catered towards football, right? I played basketball as a kid, and playing defense in basketball equated to me being a really good defensive back, right? Because of the way I defended, right? I defended a guy on the basketball court the same way I defend a receiver, right? I'm going to do the same things, right? I got to turn and run, put on the brakes and be able to move my feet. Those things transition into being really good at whatever sport you decide to do, right? But it's also in the work, right? It's also in the work, the preparation, the things that you're doing to make sure that the opportunity does come, right? Like hitting the weight room. One thing that I wish that I did a lot earlier in my career, especially in high school in the first 2 years, was go and work out in the weight room, right? Because those things transition into football and the way you play the game, right? The stronger you are, the more explosive you are, the faster you become by lifting weights, and doing the things necessary to get your body prepared for the grueling season of football, right? Also, it eliminates, not always, but it does eliminate those, injuries that come up, the little nagging things, especially as a kid that parents don't understand, when their kids' shoulders hurt, right, from hitting people, you can combat that by going in the weight room and just building your body out to combat that type of stuff, right? But also, doing the relentless pursuit of making connections and relationships, right? Those things are important, right? Going to camps, talking to coaches, just because a coach might not notice you, in the early years of your career, but just because you shook his hand, told him who you were, and you kept showing up, right? It goes a long way, because now that coach might look back and say, I remember that kid shook my hand at camp and he just kept showing up. And now look at him, like, he's come a long way, and then opportunities and doors open, right? So you just, the pursuit of greatness is always living outside of your comfort zone, right? We talked about the model of deviance today in our staff meeting, right? A lot of people will always return back to that safe zone, which is that comfort zone, right? But greatness lives outside of that, right? In the 1% of the world, right? We talk about getting 1% better every day, but we want to be in the 1% of the world. Well, you got to live outside of your comfort zone to be in that 1%, because it's always going to try to pull you back to being comfortable, right? Because that's where you strive the most, is when you're comfortable, because you know the element that you're in, right? But when you live on that outside of that comfort zone, right, you realize that you are doing things that a lot of people aren't willing to do, right? You're making sacrifices that a lot of people aren't willing to make, right? But also on the flip side of that, as coaches, right, we need, when guys are living below their comfort zone, right, we need to know why, right? Why is, whoever the player may be, why are they struggling, right? Why are they acting out, right? That's getting to know your players, so that you know how to get them to respond, right? You might need to put your arm around a guy because, his mom might be sick and he's struggling because of it, right? Or somebody in the family might be going through it and they relying on him for advice. So how can we get him back to his safe space, right? And that comes from, understanding of your players, but just being able to understand what guys, need and what they work with and how they operate will help you become an even better coach, so you can mentor a guy to be what you want him to be. And ultimately that leads to that guy playing, above and beyond for you.
I think that's great advice, Coach. I really do, obviously, with all your experience. And, but listen, I wanted to, take a minute to thank you for coming on. I know you got, your busy staff meeting, getting stuff ready, and getting ready for, training camp come up in a few months. But and I'll put this in the summary when I post the video. Let coaches, anybody, players, how they can get in contact with you. Just go ahead and let them know, and then I'll go ahead and post it in the summary after this.
I'm active on Twitter. Always willing to help out any way I can. I post a lot of content on Twitter for young coaches, or for even old coaches that might like the way I coach something, right? But I'm always learning and evolving as well. So, I like to share ideas and thoughts and the why behind things with other coaches. But my Twitter handle is Deuce, or DB _ Coach Deuce. And that's my Twitter handle. I'm not as active on Instagram as I used to be. Just don't really use it as much, honestly. So if you're going to reach out, you probably need to reach out on Twitter, or my email for the Argonauts is my first initial last name. So jjohnson@argonauts.ca. So you can reach out to me there, and that way I can get your message and respond in a timely manner.
Awesome. Coaches, parents that are listening to this, definitely take advantage. I mean, like I said, a coach and I connected a few years back, and it's been great to have him on. And Coach, I appreciate you taking the time. I wish you the best of luck, and go Knots, baby.
Yeah, let's do it.